It's my great pleasure to welcome tonight Laurie Halse Anderson.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah, can you catch me? I'm so excited. This is like the book just came out today, and I flew in yesterday. There's no snow here. Yes, the good people of Seattle kept the polar vortex at bay. Thank you for that. So I brought some pictures to show you. And, oh Doug, what did I do wrong? There we go. The destroyer wears us. Yeah, I just put that up there because I love it. I want to show you some pictures that are going to talk a little bit about my life, very briefly how I came to be an author, because I was not supposed to be. And then I'm going to talk more specifically about the new book. I will try to do that very quickly. Good thing I'm from New York, we talk very quickly there. And then there'll be time for questions, right? And then I'll sign books. And thank you again for coming out. Oh, and by the way, before I get going, you have amazing bookstores here. And that means that you have an amazing community that supports local business and local bookstores. And thank you for that. If I ever leave the Northeast, I'm coming here. Brace yourselves. Yes, so that was me. Yeah, right? Aww. From the earliest age, I was ripping my way through good books. Right? Yeah. I had a very happy childhood. You know, I was kind of shy, but I was, you know, it was good. My parents loved each other, and you know, it had lots of family connections where we lived, and life was very awesome. And then I had to go to middle school. Yeah, it's okay, you can laugh. I was just as miserable. That's me in the middle. Look how happy my mother is there to the right. Those are some cousins, an old uncle, and then my little sister at age 9 is already being very adolescent. And then things got worse. Because it was time to go to high school, right? Yeah, that's really what high school felt like. And, you know, middle school and high school can be a challenge under the best of conditions. If your family's healthy and happy and doing great. It was made much harder for me by the fact that my family kind of fell apart. Although my parents stayed married, my dad went through a real difficult time that I'm going to give you the details of in a little bit. And I think that's part of what sensitized me to the challenges facing teenagers, and that's why I write about them. My husband has known me my whole life. We met when I was 3. And he claims that I have not matured emotionally since age 15. And I say, what's wrong with that? But I do think it has, and that's why I write for teenagers, because I remember what it feels like to be confused. And I remember what it feels like to be angry and to want to punch people in the throat all the time. And to not get what's going on. Yeah, that's pretty much what my entire adolescence felt like. We have some younger people in the audience, and so if you've read my books, you know some of them deal with older themes. So I'm going to occasionally discuss things on a very vague way. Just ride with me. If you know Speak, what the main character in Speak goes through, I went through just before 9th grade started. And because of the difficult situation my family was in, I didn't tell anybody, which had a lot to do also with why high school was still so hard for me. And we'll solve that problem in a minute. That's what saved me. Reading. Not in English class. If there are any English teachers, there's an English teacher right there. I will, I'm over to your side of the room now. I'm going to suck up to you. I apologize. This is where I start my apologies to all the English teachers, because you weren't my teacher, thank goodness. Poor Ms. Maroon was. The books that I was handed in my high school English class, which was about 10 million years ago, had no connection to me. Right? They were written by dead rich white guys who had written them for other dead rich white guys 150 years earlier. And they had absolutely nothing to do with my life as a confused, traumatized adolescent in the United States at that point. Whoa, lights. That was God. God's like, yeah, go girl, tell him. So I didn't read, God in Seattle is called Doug. Yeah. That's my new best friend. I didn't read any any of the assigned books in English class. That's why God made Cliff Notes, right? Right? But I read almost every book in the library. That's why I'm not dead. And God bless the librarians in my high school, because there was a lot of times, particularly in 9th grade, when I sort of forgot to go to class. And the librarians, you know, right? If you're working with teenagers, you know that your library is a sanctuary for broken kids. That's where we go when we need to be safe. And if we're reading when we're in that sanctuary, we often find the tools that will save us. So I'm one of those kids. The best thing I did when I was 16 was I left the country. If you are 16 and life is sucking, get a passport. Leave, go away. But do it in an intelligent manner. I became a foreign exchange kid. I was an American Field Service foreign exchange student. At the end of my junior year of high school, I got on an airplane and I flew to Denmark. And I lived and worked on a pig farm for 13 months, shoveling what comes out of the back end of pigs. When I left America, I was a granola-eating, sandal-wearing, tree-hugging vegetarian. 2 weeks on a pig farm in Denmark. And I changed my attitude and I was like, give me the bacon! I love pork! Because pigs are evil creatures that deserve to be eaten with potatoes. But I also went to school in Denmark, and the nice thing about the program I was on is that you stay with a family, and the family that I stayed with in Denmark was extraordinary. I mean, they're farmers, they're hardworking people, they were sober, they were loving and kind. And all of my broken bits that had really I was a mess in high school, the kindness, the love, and both the intellectual work I did in school and the physical work I did in the farm had a lot to do with why I came back to the United States a much healthier person than I was when I left. I did go to college. I wasn't going to go to college when I first came home because I didn't like school. I never got good grades, and I had to pay for college on my own because we had no money. But I eventually removed my head from a place where it didn't belong and went first to community college, Onondaga Community College, and that's where my brain turned on. I'm a very, very proud community college graduate. No four-year school would have accepted me, given my grades. And even if they had, we had no money. We had my dad didn't have a job, we lost everything, there was no money. So I got a job working on a dairy farm, again, shoveling the material that comes out of the back end of the cows, and milking cows twice a day. And I always tell people that if the writing thing doesn't work out, I actually live down the road from a dairy farm now. So that's my fallback plan. I'm skilled fingers. But I went to community college, and because I was paying for it with the money that I earned shoveling manure, instead of sitting in the back row and falling asleep, I sat in the front row. Because I figured out, to the penny, what each class was costing me. And I never cut a class. Not only did I sit in the front row and not cut class, but I did my homework, and when I didn't understand something, I raised my hand. I said, excuse me, miss, you need to explain that again. And I was that girl. I was that girl in the front room who kept on raising my hand. And the kids behind me would go, right? Because my miss, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to do that one again because I didn't get it. And I would turn around and I would go, are you paying for my tuition? Because, no, you're not, shut up. Miss, could you please explain it again? And this miracle happened because it turns out if you go to every class, sit in the front row, pay attention to your homework, and ask questions when you don't understand, you can't help but get good grades. They fell out of my head onto the paper. This strange triangular shape started to show up on my papers. A, it was called. And instead of my teacher scrawling in red on the front, looking like she missed her medication, my teacher started to put happy faces on my papers and saying things like, good writing, ooh, nice idea. And it turns out, I'm kind of smart. I did not know this. This was a pleasant surprise. Now, I don't think I'm that much smarter than the average person, but I thought I had been much less smarter than the average person for a really long time, so that was a nice surprise. And the very kind people at Georgetown University saw my grades and the fact that I was really good at shoveling manure, and they said, come to Georgetown, come to Washington, D.C., we need manure shovelers here. I went to Georgetown and I did not study creative writing because I had no intention of becoming an author. Not at all. I studied linguistics because I'm a big language nerd. Don't study linguistics. Do you know what it qualifies you to do? Sing to cows and pigs in many different languages. But I had a good time. So I got married, started having kids. They're pretty awesome. And as my kids got older, I decided, you know, I really love my kids. And I want to write stories for them. Because I love reading, right? And I love writing. So I started to write really bad stories. Like I wrote like a 500-page tome. It wasn't really 500 pages, it just seemed like it when I was writing it, about the tooth fairy. You know, I was like that really earnest young mom who had great intentions and no skills at all. And everything I wrote for many years was rejected. Hundreds of rejection letters. Because it turns out that I had missed, when I had my bad attitude in high school, rather a critical part of this thing they call the writing process. I remember, I'm a Georgetown educated person, allegedly, and I was in my mid-20s, and I really honestly thought that if I had the talent to be a published writer, that whatever flowed from my fingertips in a first draft, as long as the spelling was correct, would be published. And I guess I wasn't that smart. I was kind of an idiot. And my husband once, I used to cry when these would come to mail, he was tired of me crying, and he finally said to me one day, you know, maybe if you fixed it, tried to make it better, did it again, it would be a little bit better, and they wouldn't reject it, and they would publish your work. And I must have been hormonal or something, and I sobbed, but where's the glory in that, right? A lot of arrogance is required to be a writer. I had plenty of arrogance, which I had to swallow. Because it turns out that actually my English teachers, they weren't right about everything, but they were right about this. Revision is the most important part of the writing process. And when I finally kind of realized that I had to start cutting, you know, I had to be willing to chop out everything that was really stinky and try to fix it, then they started to publish my work, finally. So that worked out. And so the first books that I published were actually picture books, because my kids were really little, right? Then as my kids started to get older, my books started to get older. And I had been working on Fever 1793. I don't know if anybody had to read that in middle school. You'll love it. It's got 6,000 dead people in it. Perfect middle school book. And they puke blood too. It's great. But that book, I had been working on it for a number of years, and it was still not good enough. And then I had a bad dream one night when my oldest kid was in 6th grade. So she's just starting middle school. And that dream was a nightmare. It was such a vivid nightmare. It was just the sound of a girl sobbing that woke me up. I thought it was one of my kids crying. And I couldn't go back to sleep because that kid kept on showing up in my head and sobbing. So how I get rid of bad dreams is I write them down. And what I wrote down that night, after a lot of revision, became Speak. Which I didn't know what had happened to her when I started to write. I just knew something bad had happened. And the story kind of pulled me in. And I found myself, because I had a job, right? I found myself getting up at 4:30, 4 o'clock in the morning to sneak in an hour or two of writing before my kids would wake up. The first publisher I sent it to turned it down. Second publisher I sent it to published it, but said, listen, don't get your hopes up, honey. If you sell 3,000 copies of this book over the next 3 years, you'll be lucky. I said, well, oh, and she said to me, teenagers don't read. Teenagers don't like to read. I said, why are we publishing this book? She said, teachers and librarians. They'll read anything, right? And she was wrong. She's not an editor anymore, by the way. But the book came out in 1999, which was a great year for young adult fiction, and I just think the currents of the culture crossed, and the book went boom. It's in 27 languages. They made a movie of it, and last time I checked, we sold over 2 million copies. Yeah. that teenagers don't like to read boring books. But if you give them books that don't suck, they love them. Because teenagers are the greatest consumers of art. They love music, they love dance, they love visual art, they love literature, as long as the books connect to them. And we finally figured that out 15 years ago. And so I started to think about my own adolescent experience and the teenagers that were all around me. And I started to be invited to visit high schools. Somebody once calculated that they thought over the last 15 years I've talked to more than 1 million high school students presented in auditoriums. And I just really started to fall in love with the American adolescent. And really, so many of you guys write to me and we're on social media together. And back in the day, I used to get paper envelopes and letters and stuff. And kids would tell me their stories, because when kids connect with a book, they often connect with the author, because they feel that that author understands them. That's why my books are filled with such sarcasm, because it's sometimes the only weapon that teenagers have. And I really feel like if I have one goal in life besides being a mom to my kids, it's to be one of the aunties of American culture. I think those of us who write for teenagers, we tend to care about you deeply. Chris Crutcher's kind of a local man. He's like Uncle Chris. I'm Auntie Laurie. I'm the aunt who will give you condoms. when your mother won't. And I realized that, sometimes when people talk about like all this subject matter of all my books, it sounds incredibly depressing. But the truth is that everybody has something. Sometimes your bad things happen when you're an adult, sometimes sadly they happen when you're a little bit younger. But what we all have in common is that we're human, and we're frail and vulnerable. And to understand that gives us all strength. So I wrote a bunch of books. Catalyst, Twisted, Prom. Prom's my happy book. Remember that guy I told you, my husband, who's known me since I was 3? He's my second husband. My other one was my starter husband. My starter husband and I are super good friends. But my real husband walked me home from kindergarten. And I wrote Prom when I was engaged to him, and I was going to kill off the main character. It was going to be deeply depressing, but I was so happy, right? Because the love of my life, and he was going to marry me. So there's some bad stuff in it, but mostly it's a funny book. Winter Girls I've taken a lot of flack for because it's about eating disorders. And people have accused me of developing eating disorders in young people and triggering them, which is something that I take seriously. I consulted with a lot of medical people, psychiatrists and doctors before I wrote the book, because I am pretty good at writing, and I didn't want to trigger anybody. And what they told me was that if you are on the verge of an eating disorder or struggling with it, billboards can trigger you. People Magazine triggers you. Life triggers you. And what they encouraged me to do was to write a book that told the whole story. Not just what it's like feels like to be in an eating disorder, but what it's like to make the decision to choose life, to choose health, and to reach for help. So there are on the internet, for those of you who have Tumblr accounts, I get frustrated because I see people pulling lines out of Winter Girls that are the lines that are really intensely kind of, people call them pro-anorexia, and that makes me furious because that's what book censors do. They pull lines out of books that don't characterize the book. They just pull out those lines for effect. I say when you do things like that, that's like pulling the story of Cain and Abel out of the Bible and then calling it a murder mystery. So it's an interesting book that it has a lot of controversy, and I'm good at that. So I don't mind having discussions about it. Censorship has also become a huge thing in my life. Because Speak is very commonly taught in high schools. When it first came out, people were teaching it at the end of senior year in a lot of high schools. Now it's commonly taught in 8th and 9th grades, which is good. And I've wound up being invited to speak and think a lot about censorship. Which brings me to the new book. I don't know if this one will be censored. We'll see. It just came out today. I saw some of you guys reading it when I walked in. It was so exciting. This book book starts in 1945. Well, the book doesn't start. The writing process of the book started in 1945. The book is set in today. Because of that dude. That's my dad. He turned 18 on May 3rd, 1945, and that's when the draft board got him. He wasn't even allowed to finish his senior year. He went into the Army. It was the end of World War II, and he was with the soldiers that helped the newly liberated prisoners of the concentration camp in Dachau. And so my dad and his fellow soldiers did a lot of burials, and they helped the living, and they tried to make sense of it all. My dad is 86 now. He has dementia. He doesn't remember very much about my mom. He remembers every minute of those months and years. So I got to thinking about, because I know what it's like to be a kid of a vet who has PTSD. Remember I told you my family kind of fell apart when I was in middle school? All those demons and the memories that had been chasing my dad for a long time, you know, he tried to drive them away by drinking, and the drinking got out of hand, and our family kind of blew up. We didn't have the expression PTSD though. I just thought my dad was a drunk. And I loved him. I still do. My dad's an awesome, wonderful man. But I didn't know when I walked in the door if he was going to be throwing things, or if he was going to be throwing up, or if he was going to be dead, or what it was. So if you grow up in that household, that's hard. And my nephew came home from Iraq and Afghanistan 2 years ago, and I saw him try to re-enter civilian life. We have a lot of kids from my area, it's a rural area, go into the military. And so I'm maybe more in tune with that than a lot of other people, and I just saw it happening all over again. So that was why I wanted to write this book, the story of Haley Kincaid, whose dad has seen it all and seen too much, and who's losing his battle to hold the memories back. His memories keep chasing him. And she's had to become the parent to her father. And she loves him, you know, but it's not, things are out of balance when it's the kid has to be the parent, especially when your parent is suffering. And so, you know, there's one scene, this is one of my favorites, and she comes home and her dad's had all of his guns out, and he's been cleaning them. And the book is kind of a juxtaposition of two storylines. There's that stuff going on at home that nobody knows about, having to go home and clean up the gunpowder and the barrel oil from the table. And then there's her life in high school. The theme of memories is one that runs through the whole thing. Her father is fighting and fleeing from his hard memories. She has kind of walled off the good memories she has of her childhood, because when your life is really stinky, believe it or not, sometimes remembering good stuff hurts even more, because it lets you know how far you've come from that. So they're both struggling, drowning. And then she falls in love. I've never done this before, writing a love story. Years ago, I think I was in Texas, and I was talking about my books. I think Twisted had just come out, and a very nice girl in the front row raised her hand at the Q&A, very concerned, and she said, "Miss, are you okay?" And she was inquiring about the state of my mental health, because she said, "You know, your stuff is really depressing." And I said, "You're going to be a counselor." But I realized that actually I've been so blessed. I have a wonderful, wonderful life, and it was maybe time to put something a little bit more uplifting. And in terms of those of you who are writers in the room, the craft piece, the creative challenge, I wanted two very strong storylines, not just one. And plus, falling in love is really funny. And it creates all kinds of awkward moments, and I had a good time writing about those. And I also had a lot to say about the culture of adolescence and the culture of love. So that's the new book. You have it in your hot little hands, some of you. I'm going to be on a book tour for a couple weeks. I'm on Twitter and Tumblr and pretty much every other social media, because I live in the boondocks and it's boring. So you can follow me on that if you want. When I get off book tour, I'm going to go home to my people. Yes, those are my people. They're awesome. My kids are all grown up, so it's just the dogs. This is my life motto. Once, after a presentation, a kid went and got this tattooed. She actually, I had this slide up, and she actually got the font too. I think it was like 52 point. It took off her whole arm. And she sent me a picture of it, and I wrote back, I said, how old are you? She said, I'm 19. I said, I love your tattoo! If you are under 18, please don't get this tattooed until you're older than 18, or your mom's going to yell at me. And that's all that I wanted to say with my pictures. Do we have time for questions? All right, clap for me for a second.